What if the patient becomes aggressive because they become disoriented with fever? How are all those things handled? These are all important protocols that go from how to get suited up to how to handle the situations and how to take it all off and how to dispose of all of it. And it's not simple. It's not easy. And when you have something as virulent as Ebola, I've said this on the show before, that you can have unprotected sex with an HIV positive person on average 100 times. 100 times. Despite the 80s and 90s when every homophobic person in America was running around thinking that they were going to catch AIDS off a toilet seat, having full-blown sex, heterosexual sex, with somebody does not transmit AIDS very easily. On the other hand, if they have Ebola, all you need is a tiny droplet to get anywhere where the virus can latch into the human body, and apparently it transmits extremely well. So whereas AIDS does not transmit well, and hepatitis transmits better, but not anywhere close to the efficacy of Ebola, you end up with something where any breach in protocol that exposes somebody to a picoliter of contaminated fluid, which, by the way, Ebola viruses, and I don't want to bore everybody, but let's talk about this for a minute. Okay, rabies. How does rabies work? Rabies gets into the person. It then comes out in your saliva, okay? You have a lot of virus in your saliva and other bodily fluids, but particularly in your saliva, and you froth at the mouth. You start frothing at the mouth. Why are you frothing at the mouth? That virus has figured out how to hijack the mammalian system to make you salivate, right? Because that's where the virus is going to be. So now you've got a mouth full of saliva. You're literally foaming at the mouth with saliva. Why? Because rabies wants to get into the saliva. And then it says, okay, stage 2. While I've got him foaming at the mouth, I need to tweak his brain a little bit and cause him to have severe anger and aggression issues and lose control and do what? Bite. So the rabies virus is capable of hijacking the mammalian brain to froth at the mouth, and become hyper-aggressive and bite. So that little virus gets in there, and it's worked out a sequence of events at the cellular level to hijack high-level behaviors and control the production of saliva and control the aggression of the mammal to cause it to spread the rabies virus to the next recipient. That's how clever viruses are. We're not dealing with this little particle that doesn't have a master plan. It has a master plan. What's Ebola's master plan? Ebola's master plan is I transmit through bodily fluids. So I'm a hemorrhagic fever. I hijack the mammal's body. I completely load him down with virus. And then I make him bleed, sweat, vomit, diarrhea, urinate. I just make fluids flow out of this body and liquefy it in every possible direction so that I can get into the next body. So Ebola doesn't hijack your behavior and make you aggressive the same way rabies does. And it doesn't cause you to dip your arm in water the way this parasite in Africa does by making you feel like you're on fire and then explode its eggs out into the water while you're doing that. No, Ebola lets you walk around and get sicker and sicker, and then the last couple days turns you into a pile of goo so that you leave virus particles, these highly virulent virus particles, wherever you can. So God help us all if this thing were to become airborne, because it's extremely virulent in small amounts, but it's doing a damn good job of infecting people, because even despite all those barriers and protocols, unless they're followed perfectly and unless the right equipment's employed, frankly, it can get around some rubber gloves and a face mask and an apron, because it just creates so much fluid and so much infectious material and only needs such a tiny toehold to take over your body that it's just damn dangerous. But they don't really want anybody to think about that. All right, I'm done.
There was something that I heard on the radio this week. I'm going to mess up describing what the person was. I don't know if it was a virologist or something, But the person that was on there spent about, I think he said 6 or 8 years of his life just studying the virus. And he was getting the point across that the overwhelming majority, and he strongly emphasized overwhelming majority of the studies on the contagious ability of the Ebola, most of the studies were for what happens like 3 weeks and farther out. He says there is very few studies and very little scientific data and what's been done regarding the amount of contagious ability in the shorter period. And he says we really don't know too much about it. It's not really hard science when they're saying that it's really not that contagious. He says all the studies are on the long term, the overwhelming. We have very few that have ever been done on the short term. So we don't know truly when it becomes contagious. We only have some guesses. And I'm telling people right now, err on the side of caution.
Right. Well, err on the side of caution, and also don't buy into this hokey-pokey, false, rosy picture, because if things are good, they can tell you they're good. But if things are bad, they're still going to tell you they're good. So you're not getting any real information from the government. They'll just look you in the eye and say, well, our protocol must have not been followed because our protocols can keep you safe. Well, great. You know what? That's like being at the range and saying, well, somebody must have breached protocol and that's why you're dead. Great. Somebody didn't follow protocol and now I'm dead. But maybe protocols were followed and we just didn't realize that particular gun could just go off all on its own because our protocols didn't require us to check into a few things or didn't require us to have certain knowledge. Or maybe we didn't realize that was as deadly as we thought it was. And I think that's the bigger issue here. I think that the problem they're having in dealing with it is it's just so virulent and it takes such a small amount. We're not used to dealing with something. Again, let's go back to AIDS. A lot of healthcare workers have accidentally stick themselves with a sharp while dealing with an AIDS patient. They haven't all contracted AIDS. In fact, it's not that common because just being exposed to the AIDS virus does not give you the AIDS virus. It has to be the right number of virus particles under the right circumstances for the AIDS to take a hold. It appears that Ebola's specialty is to create mass amounts of infectious material and only need the tiniest amount to cause an infection. Ebola reminds me of a puffball. It makes 1 billion trillion spores, but it only takes one of those spores to make a new puffball. And that seems to be the strategy. And so whereas a lot of other viruses need you have a certain number of particles or they have to get in just the right place at the right time, Ebola just has to get on a mucous membrane or in an open skin wound, or God forbid, maybe it can crawl right through dry skin. I mean, I don't mean literally crawl because I realize viruses don't have, those kinds of capabilities. They don't have legs per se. Somebody's going to call me up and say, well, there's some phages that have leg-like structures. All right. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
I got a question. Does anybody out there in the listenerville know anybody that works at the hospitals? I know myself, a friend of mine, his wife's a nursing assistant.
Yeah.
I haven't reached out to her yet. She works at the York Hospital. I've been kind of curious to ask her, what are they telling you? Are you guys going through training? Are you guys, being prepared for the what if kind of thing? Because I'd be really curious to know if anybody out there in the healthcare profession knows about any of this stuff.
Right.
What are they really doing versus telling us?
Well, as I understand it, they have a lot of problems right now. There's a lot of fear that a lot of doctors and nurses are not going to come to work if a particular hospital announces that it has an Ebola patient because they realize the protocols are askew and things aren't going well. And I would think in this environment, we're no longer just going to drop people into random hospitals. But the problem is if the Ebola really starts to spread and people just start cropping up in emergency rooms with it, people are going to get exposed to it. So my understanding is that the healthcare people are a little nervous. And there's big concerns about, you ever heard the blue flu, right? When everybody just says, oh, I'm not well today. The blue flu. It's called, I'm just not calling in because, we're having a little soft strike here. So it's quite possible that some of the healthcare workers will do that. Now, on the other hand, a lot of them are do-gooder types, and I don't mean that I mean being facetious, but they really believe in what they do, and therefore some of them will have a hard time, not being there for patients, and will go in and risk their own hides. So it's not there's going to be a mass exodus of everybody in healthcare, but it's like my buddy Glenn Beck used to say. Sometimes it's just not about you either. You have kids, you have parents you're caring for. Maybe caring for an elderly parent, and you go, well, if I go to work and I catch the Ebola, who's going to take care of Dad, right? Or who's going to take care of Junior? How's this going to work? So people have a lot of pressures on them, and if things get really bad and it gets clear that we're not successfully, let's imagine the CDC comes forward with these new protocols or whatever they're claiming they're going to do, and 2 more healthcare workers contract Ebola despite all this. Well, you know what's going to happen. Then people are going to be like, wait a minute, there is no way to protect against it. So hell no, I don't want to go to work. But really, 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 it's a dangerous proposition any which way you look at it.
I got a question to all the people out there if they want to respond to your site or something, or hey, even call in or something. Hindsight. Let's say right now, we go out 6 months from now.
Right.
We're 6 months farther ahead. Do you think we're going to be wishing that we would have done some serious curtailing on the flights coming from that area, or the screening or forceful quarantining before you are allowed back in the public? And
yeah, I think we definitely will think we could have done things better, and we may get a little better at it. The flip side is I think we're also going to realize, though, that where we really missed the boat was in not going to Africa sooner and more aggressively to help stem off the flow of Ebola through Liberia and Sierra Leone. What we did was we allowed it to get such a big foothold and the infection to grow. It's kind of like a person who has a diabetic leg wound that's a little pinhole in their leg, and they look at it and they go, well, yeah, somebody's got to do something about that because that's going to get worse. And then they show up at the doctor's office a month later with some gangrene and wonder why they're cutting their whole leg off, right? Well, we let that go. We've stamped out Ebola numerous times in Africa over the years, successfully. And we could have done it this time, but the World Health Organization and the CDC, nobody was doing their job. They've all had budget cuts. They don't seem essential. So really what we should bet hindsight on is what we didn't do up till now, which is prepare our World Health Organization and our CDC to and fund them to more aggressively go after these diseases.
I thought I had heard that a lot of the CDC budget had been going towards other things because, everything is hindsight in life.
Right. And it does. It's been going all kinds of things. But a lot of it is Congress hasn't wanted to spend money. The American people are fickle. We want cancer cured. We want this done, but we don't really want our government spending any money on it. And then we complain when drug companies want to make big profits after they spend billions of dollars trying to develop us a drug. We need to spend a lot more money on basic research than we do currently, and we need to continue to move the sciences forward. But the reality is, what keeps happening is every time we get to another step in the life sciences, we realize how much more complex everything is than we thought it was at first blush. So just to take you backwards, remember, okay, we found out what DNA is, so now we know it codes your cell. But then we found out that DNA, how DNA is coded is one step in it, but how many copies of it you have changes the way things are expressed. And then other genes turn some genes off, and some genes turn other genes off again, and some turn off the genes to turn off some genes but not others. And some things code for proteins but are actually necessary for 3 different proteins. And then actually some of your genetic material is transferred as messenger RNA and some as tRNA. And so all the information in a cell might not just all be in the nucleus, but it might also be in the cytoplasm as well as free strands of mRNA and tRNA. And so when cellular division occurs, it's not just transferring genes, it's transferring the soup, and some of the ingredients in the soup are self-replicating. And then it turns out that, we've got a drug called Vioxx, which is a COX-2 2 inhibitor, which works real well, just like some COX-1 inhibitors. But oops, we didn't realize that the COX-2 enzyme is important in your heart And so when we created this COX-2 inhibitor, this particular COX-2 inhibitor also damages your heart tissue because nobody really realized the overlap at the time. And then it turns out that, yeah, you got lung cancer.